Good morning, everybody. I'm a little stunned by the premise here that maybe there's something wrong with Washington, and you all are probably wondering where that idea came from. But my name's Mickey Edwards, and I'm here with Joe Manchin and Dan Glickman, and we're going to try to talk to you a little bit about the situation and its causes, about why it seems so difficult to bring people together to try to make things work in Washington. I'm going to start with a few remarks. Dan and then Joe, Dan and I served in Congress together, and this is kind of a shocking thing because I'm a Republican and Dan's a Democrat, and we like each other, and we actually, even though we disagreed on a lot, we agreed on a lot, and we were able to find ways to come together. And poor Joe, who serves now. And I hope all of you read the article in Time magazine about Senator Manchin and about how frustrating it is, and he'll get into that, and we'll try to figure out and engage with you about what can be done to make things differently. Let me just start with a couple of general observations. One, that is that the system we have in Washington today is sometimes described as dysfunctional. I would argue it's not dysfunctional. It's functional because it is operating exactly according to the political system that we have set up, in which people run for office in primaries and conventions looking over their shoulder about the people who are more extreme, more ideological, more partisan, afraid they're going to get taken out if they show signs of compromise or a willingness to talk to people who have a different point of view. And we have this system set up where in 46 of the 50 states, if you run in a party primary or a convention and you don't win, regardless of how few people participated in that primary or convention, you cannot win, you cannot even be on the ballot in November. That's true in 46 states. We've set up a system that allows the hyper-partisans to decide who moves forward and is available for you to choose. And we also allow the majority party in every state legislature, in 37 state legislatures, to decide what congressional district lines are going to be like. And the result is somebody like Senator Joe Manchin ends up serving in a Congress that is dominated by people who don't want to get together and work for the common good as much as they work for their party advantage. Now, one of the things Dan Glickman does, besides having been in Congress when I was and having been Secretary of Agriculture, is that now he and I are both at the Aspen Institute, but he is also very active in running the Bipartisan Policy Center, and I know he'll talk more about the report they just did that suggests a number of very specific things that can be done to make our system work better. One of the problems that we have, and I don't know whether you'll want to get into this in your conversation with us, is the question about whether or not the Congress, as dysfunctional as it may be, is actually reflective as opposed to not reflective of what's happening in the Congress. So the Pew Research Center just came out with a very scary report about the large percentage of people in this country who prefer not to live someplace among people who belong to a different political party, or who don't want a member of their family to marry somebody who's a member of a different political party. So we have to look at ourselves as well as what's happening in Washington in the executive and the legislative branches. But I think one thing that I hope, and I don't know, we read in the article in Time about how frustrated Senator Manchin is. And Joe, I looked at that, and I don't know how you get up every day and go in and, Senator Manchin was not only Secretary of State in West Virginia and then governor, but then when he was doing those jobs, he was rising above what his party label is. He was working as a West Virginian, not a Democrat. Dan Glickman was working as a Kansan, as a member of the United States Congress, rather than as a Democrat. That's the way it used to be. And if we can change the system and change the culture enough that we can go back to a system of government in which all of us and all of you are Americans in common, trying to solve our common problems so that we can keep the military with the equipment it needs, keep the water pure, keep the bridges from collapsing, keep the medicines safe. If we can get back to where we say that we as Americans have to have a common government working for all of us, that's going to require the effort not only of Dan and Joe and me, but all of you and all of the people you know. So this topic we're talking about here is really a challenge. It's a challenge for us, and it's a challenge for you. So I'm going to, Dan and I served together, as I said, in Congress, and it was a different time. And you've also seen it, Dan, from the executive branch when you were Secretary of Agriculture. So, Dan?
Thanks, Mickey, and thanks to my friend Joe Manchin, one of the great leaders. And first of all, a little self-promotional stuff. So Mickey mentioned this. Outside, there are these books. It's called Governing in a Polarized America, a Bipartisan Blueprint to Strengthen Our Democracy. And the Bipartisan Policy Center, which is another organization I'm involved with, which was founded by the last 4 Senate Majority Leaders, Senators Dole, Baker, who unfortunately passed away yesterday, Mitchell, and Daschle, formed this group to try to see if we could come up with constructive bipartisan solutions. So we got a grant from a major foundation to do a report, and there are 65 recommendations here on how to change America, from the legislative branch to to election reform, to redistricting, adopt some of Mickey's suggestions from his book, to a final chapter on public service, how we have to change the culture in America to get American, particularly young people, more engaged in their system as a way to build citizenship. And General McChrystal and John Bridgeland and others are working on that project separately, as well as from the Aspen Institute. But it's outside, so I'd recommend that you take a look at it. I would add to what Mickey said the following. Our country was established to not work very well. The Founding Fathers did not want an efficient government at all. So what did they do? They created an executive and a legislative branch which was equal, separation of powers, and then they feared the tyranny of the Congress. So they created 2 houses in Congress that are equal. So we effectively have a political system that has 1 foot on the brake and 1 foot on the accelerator at all time. That's what they wanted. And you don't find that's not true in parliamentary systems. It's certainly not true in centralized authoritarian political systems, but we have it. So the facts are, this system was meant to make it really difficult to get anything done anyway. But we've managed to survive because of one word: trust. One word, that we believe that there's a common good to be shared. And so over the last 200 years, by and large, while there have been great differences, people have gotten together. And that is frayed. And there's no question, whether it's the 24-hour media, whether it's the amount of money in our political system, whether it's the issues of party districting that Mickey talked about and that people gravitate to their extreme bases, there's no question that that impacts the ability of the Congress to get things done. And it also impacts the executive branch, because you can't look at these issues without saying that the president has to engage this political process. A disengaged president is usually a prescription for a Congress gone wild. And so we can't let that happen either. So while there's a lot of blame to go around, the fact of the matter is there are things that we can do to make our political system better. For example, the president should meet with congressional leaders on a regular basis. That doesn't happen. The president should address a joint session of Congress or a joint caucuses on a regular basis. That doesn't happen. There should be regular order in the House and the Senate. That doesn't happen. So for our system to work well, you got to have people cooperating. Otherwise, it's just gridlock and paralysis, because that's the way it was set up to be. 110 years ago, Mark Twain said there was only one true criminal class in America, and that was the Congress. Okay, so in some sense, things haven't changed all that much. People have always been suspicious of their elected, of the body. They're not so suspicious of their own elected representatives, but they're suspicious of their body. They were suspicious of me. I actually lost in 1994, and I recall that famous line from Mo Udall, who, when he lost the primaries to run for president, he said, "The public has spoken, the bastards." So, you know, that's the way I kind of felt about my constituents at that time. But in any event, but I think we can do better. That's the whole thing. We have to do better, as Mickey said. Without doing better, then we risk paralysis not being able to do anything, and then America is weakened in the process. So I think the goal is to try to find what are those things we can do to make this political system more resilient and more prosperous. So with that, I'll yield back.
Yeah, Joe?
I think, first of all, you have to understand our environment, the environment I came to. I came from the governor's mansion in West Virginia. I was elected in 2004, re-elected in 2008. Senator Byrd dies in 2010. I thought I would be able to appoint somebody until 2012 and then make a decision if I would run or not for the Senate. Robert Byrd died 1 week too soon for me to do that with the Constitution and the time frame in our state Constitution. So we had to have a special primary, and then I had to make a decision. So I thought, you know, our state was in great shape. We went through the recession better than most any state, and our credit ratings were high, and we put our priorities based on our values and just kind of had things in order. And I thought, well, we're in good shape. And I had a person that would succeed me who I had confidence and understood how to run the finances of our state. So I said, maybe I can go to Washington and hopefully contribute. That's what I was hoping for. And Senator Byrd made such an impression there. I mean, at the time that he spent 50-some years, but he was an institution. Quick thing on Senator Byrd when I got there. I'll never think, Ben Cardin was trying to rearrange the rules of the Senate. So he was trying to figure out how we could best operate like we're talking now. And he was getting all the rules, and he was having a hard time. And someone said, Ben, where are our rules? And he says, well, I can't find them. He says, well, I don't know. He said, we just can't find them. Pat Leahy, who's been there for so long, an institution, Pat says, well, I can tell you exactly. I remember when it happened. He said it was 1976, and Robert C. Byrd stood right at the door there at the caucus door. Everybody walked in. He gave them a set of rules, and we voted on it. He stood there when everyone left and took them all up. So he said, wherever he's buried is where the rules are. Now, that's how much of an institution Robert C. Byrd was. So I go there, and I'm thinking, the first question I asked, I said, as a governor and as a legislator, you know, we had to have balanced budget amendments by our Constitution. So I said, how much revenue are we going to have in the Treasury? And they said, we're going to spend about $3.7 trillion. I said, okay. I said, but how much revenue do you think that we might have? And before I could get that out, they said, we've looked at it every way we can, and we don't think we can cut much from 3.7. I said, I got it. I know you want to spend 3.7. How much do you have, or you think you're going to have? Because as governors, we met every week with our financial people, and they told me exactly what the revenue estimates, and I had to make adjustments accordingly, so I ended up the year in good shape. They said, well, we think about 2.2. And I said, you know, we're not mathematicians in West Virginia, but we can count pretty good. We think you're about 1.5 short. Well, don't worry about it. It doesn't work that way in Washington. But right there was a real signal that I was going to have a problem. Now, from there, you have to understand our environment. We call a vote at 5:30 for Monday. Usually it's a nomination, just to show that we've appeared. So that's Monday at 5:30. Tuesdays and Wednesdays are pretty long work days. We'll start at anywhere from 7, 8 o'clock in the morning and go clear to 8 or 9, 10 o'clock at night. So you can say, well, we've done more than 2. But the bottom line is because they want to leave on Thursday afternoon. So if I wanted to say, hey, Dan, why don't we have dinner tomorrow night? And he said, boy, Joe, I'd love to. He said, but they got me scheduled for fundraisers. I got meetings going up to 7. Got fundraisers after that. I said, you want to have coffee in the morning Wednesday? Well, I've got a fundraiser Wednesday morning I've got to attend. It goes on and on. So there's no time, one-on-one time. The time you see us to when there's any type of mingling or collegiality is basically when you see us on the floor. If you're on C-SPAN and you see us mingling about a vote, that's about the only time. So we come armed. I'll come down with a fistful of these on a bill I'm working on or amendment I want to support, and I'm standing here watching the senators walk in so I can go talk them because that's the only time I can catch them. So with that type, and then if you said, what are y'all going to do Friday night? Are y'all going to be in town? Maybe we'll all have dinner, get the wives together, and, oh, well, I'm sorry, we leave. I'll be out of here. I got to go back home. So that's the atmosphere. There is no bonding, if you will, or no building of any type of relationships. And then on top of that, we're expected every day to raise money for our respected parties. So Mickey, he would be RSCC, Republican Senatorial Committee. Dan would be Democrat Senatorial Committee. Every day they come to work they're expected to go at least maybe an hour a day or something, go over to the headquarters, which takes it off the Capitol grounds, and make phone calls to you all. Would you please help us? You know, we're really fighting this issue here, and the Republicans and Mickey, damn it, they just won't agree on anything, so I really need your help to push this issue. You know, this is the song and dance that goes back and forth. And then they're expected on weekends, let's see, Mickey's up for election this year, so they're expected Dan to go into Mickey's home state and campaign against him. Now, he had to raise money against him, had to campaign against him. Now, the next week they come back on Monday evening, and he's supposed to sit down with Mickey on Tuesday and say, hey, Mickey, how about this piece of legislation? You want to co-sponsor it? What do you think Mickey's going to say? That's the environment I'm in. Now, you got to help us how we figure it out. I've got an idea, and this will be the first time, the first place I've said this. I've thought of everything I can. I've taken a personal pledge myself. Since I have been there, I do not make the phone calls against Mickey or Dan. I do not go and campaign against a setting colleague. I won't do it. I'm just not going to do that. And I can look with a clear conscience of every senator and go shake their hand and say, will you work with me on this? Will you help me? And they can look at me and know that Joe Manchin is not working to take my job away or do harm to me. So hopefully I've built that trust over 3.5, 4 years, and that's what I think. So I'm thinking about introducing an ethics violation bill that any member of Congress that basically campaigns against a setting colleague, whether it's in your party or the other party, it would be an ethics violation. That might keep them, bring some civility back to it, knowing that basically if you want to violate the ethics laws, I'm going to run against you as being an unethical person. You know, that probably hurts more with the trust of the voters. So I'm thinking of anything and everything. I'm just throwing that out. This is the first public gathering that I have said that. And my staff has been talking. I said, you tell me, we've tried everything. And
I'm for that too.
So we'll see what happens. I'm sure it'll be received warmly in the Senate.
You know, one thing, just Mickey, that we probably didn't have to face is the frenetic search for money. It's metastasized. So the first time I ran, I spent $100,000 and ran against an incumbent congressman and won. I don't know how much you spent the first time.
Well, I ran against an incumbent congressman and lost, so it's
different. But the second time you won, right?
Yes.
Okay. That race today would cost $3 to $5 million.
Right.
So what it does is it requires them to do, as you said, an hour. Some of these House members will spend 4 and 5 hours.
They'll be running between committee, between committee meetings. They'll start running back.
Beyond everything else, and the fact is that people do not give you money because they like the color of your tie or their shirt. They generally want access or something, and I understand that. But it takes away the ability to spend time focusing on policy issues too. That's a real bad precedent to set.
But I don't want you all to get the impression that this is just the way it has always been, because when Dan and I were serving in the House, we didn't campaign against other sitting members. You just didn't do that. And it was because we had to work together. I would not have, in a million years, gone into Wichita to try to campaign against Dan. Dan would not have come to Oklahoma City to campaign against me.
Well, half of your relatives lived in Wichita, so that did make a big difference.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
That was one part of it. But in addition to that, there was a time when what we did, Joe, believe it or not, was to raise money for our own campaigns in lesser amounts than you'd have to today, but not for the party to knock off other people. It was really when Newt Gingrich kind of rose up in the leadership that the idea started that to where it leads today is that every sitting member in the House not only raises enough money for their own reelection, but $300,000 a year to contribute to the party coffers to knock off members of the other party. And so there's a lot of blame placed on the people who are contributing to campaigns, lobbyists. Well, I'll tell you what they'll tell you, they're the victims. They're the ones who are getting hit up all the time, for money. And so the system has not always been that way. And we can change it. We can go back to, I don't know whether you can pass your resolution, Joe, but I think it would be a great idea.
It'll make them have to say, I support that or I don't support it.
Yeah, that's right. It would
Maybe
be a
that's
good
a start.
idea. Well, I think, let's make this kind of an open engagement here. So we've kind of laid out for you the situation as it's been, as it is now, some of the contributing factors. Yeah, Joe.
Let me get some. I'll get it going for you all, and then you all can jump right in here. so you'll know, we're not voting on a lot of things. And so how come the process is not working? Because it become politics over policy. So if Harry Reid is protecting the Democrats that are up for election right now, and my dear friend Mark Udall and Mark Bagich and all the Senate, you know, we've got good candidates, and they'll have good opponents against them. But the bottom line is Harry's got to look and see, okay, if I make Mark take that vote, then the proposition will spin that totally out of control because there's so much money to get the proper people that can really put the spin to it. So it'd be best off if we don't take the vote. And before you know it, we're not taking any votes because they're all controversial. And there's some of us who are just frustrated. So we didn't come here for this. We're pretty big people. We got here because it was a tough fight all the way up. I said, I can defend myself. I'd rather come to you all and explain to you why I voted for something, right, wrong, or indifferent, whether you agree or disagree, than saying, I didn't get to vote on that. And you're going to speculate, well, yeah, but we think you'd vote like that if you did. So what we've been trying, there's about 10 Democrats who are trying to tell Harry, let's go up. The system of the Senate is made up for the minority to make us look bad anyway. And we've been the minority. The Democrats have been to make but that's the system, the checks and balance. We're okay with that. And I can defend it. I says, and if I make a mistake, I can go home and tell people, I'm sorry, I'm not perfect, I made a mistake. I'll go back and try to fix it. I'm not worried about that, but they're holding votes back, whether it's Keystone Pipeline, some of those votes. We voted 43 times on the Affordable Care Act. Whether you think it's right, wrong, or indifferent, we voted 43. I wasn't there when it passed. I just said, listen, what I have in front of me, I'd like to try to fix it and repair it. I know what we had before didn't work with the amount of money we spent, so let's try to repair it. If we can't, you've exhausted all your energy, then throw it out. So we're on record, and that's the problem we have. And then you have Mitch on the other side saying, okay, Harry, if you put that piece of legislation up, these are the amendments we're going to demand so that we don't Rule 14 you, which is basically we'll gerrymander the darn thing and hold it up so you can't move the bill. And Harry will say, well, I can't give you that many amendments because I know 3 of those amendments you're just going to use them to politicize, to use against the guys I got up running right now. Is this making sense? That's what's happening. So then him and Mitch get in a tough like this, loggerheads. Harry says, well, I can't bring the bill up because they've threatened to do this to me. And if I do that, I've got to give them the votes. And if I do the votes, that'll hurt. We says, Harry, vote. I said, pretty soon the American public's pretty intelligent. They're going to figure out who's playing the games as long as we're trying to make the process work. That's what we're trying to get back to what we call regular order. So with that, we'll throw it open and see where we go.
Let me say the regular order is that we were just talking about that. What you have in Washington today, the way they're functioning, is that we don't really have any legislative leaders. We have party leaders. So Harry Reid is a Democratic Party leader in the Senate, and Mitch McConnell is a Republican Party leader in the Senate. Same thing with Nancy and with John Boehner. And they're working not to say, how do we bring forward the issues that you're talking about that are not coming forward, but how do we protect our party? How do we advance our party? How do we do our agenda? So, one of the stories I tell, and Dan will recognize this, here is that, you go to all these events here at the Ideas Festival, and there is a lectern here. One of the most shocking things I discovered when I was elected to the House is that there was not a lectern on the House floor. There are 2 lecterns. There's a Republican lectern and a Democratic lectern. There's a Democratic cloakroom and a Republican cloakroom. You don't even read the sports pages together, and so that's part of the problem. And when we were there, your families would be back in your district, but a lot of the families were in Washington. You got to know each other. You got to know each other as people, as families.
The extraordinary thing is, I think 2/3 of the members of the House now live in their offices.
Yeah.
So if you're a constituent coming in there and you go sit down on the couch that your congressman's been sleeping in all night, it's not necessarily the most attractive thing in the world for sanitary purposes and other kinds of things. But there are 2 things here. Walter, when he opened the thing last night, his big idea was collaboration. Okay, collaborating and performing as a high-performance team. That was something that Congress and the government has been able to do pretty regularly over the last 200 years. That's this collaboration is kind of slowed down. On the other hand, as Joe and I were talking about, when the country has a real crisis, people will still come together.
No crisis management.
So crisis usually can be handled, but long-term stuff is just deadlocked. Nothing seems to work there.
So join this conversation. Yes, over here, this lady over here. We have a microphone, so wait till the microphones come to you.
Hi, this is a question for Senator Manchin because you've been a governor. Could you comment on the fact that mayors and governors are literally bypassing the Congress and trying to get things done on the state and local level? Is that a healthy thing? Is that not a healthy thing?
Well, the 10th Amendment allows that to happen. I just don't believe our founding fathers ever intended for us to micromanage and run the government from Washington. I really don't. The 10th Amendment basically, the experiment is basically the states. 10th Amendment says you have states' rights. A lot of those states' rights have been taken and given, if you will. With that being said, the governors are responsible to do something every day. You're held accountable, and you have your strict lines of your state constitution with the overriding federal constitution that we work within, the framework of that. And I think there's a lot of people right now that believe the federal has made an overreach, federal government. A lot of people believe that the president basically with his executive orders has overreached. The Supreme Court has ruled on some of that overreaching and trying to bring it back. So with all that being said, I can understand the president's frustration. I hope he understands our frustration. I understand the governor's frustrations down. Basically, this tells you people want you to do something, do your job. So if you have if they give you an example, if I'd have been governor and the Affordable Care Act comes down and basically it says you got to do this, this, and this, and I got to raise from, and I told him, I was head of the National Governors Association in 2009. I was on the phone with the senators and they were discussing the bill. They were going to 138%. I said, do you understand that Medicaid, the way it works now, we're not mandated. It's a moral responsibility and obligation that we have, but we still have to balance the budget, so you never mandated we had to do certain things. So most governors took care of families with dependent children. We didn't take care of individuals or singles because we couldn't afford that luxury. With that being said, they went to 138th percentile. I said, gentlemen, ladies, do you know that we're mostly all state, 50 states, only 2 of them were above that. We're below 50% of the people that qualify because of income that we cover. How are you taking us to 138? Don't you think 100% would have been a lofty goal? And they thought, what happened is they wanted 250 because they wanted universal health care. It was a way to backdoor us. So I would have said this, as a governor, I'd have put up my own exchange, and I'd have dealt back and forth with the feds because they wanted numbers. And I said, fine, you want me to do that? I'll try it, but give me a waiver and don't penalize me if I don't do it because I can't afford it. I'd have given myself wiggle room as a governor because I've got to answer every day and every year to a balanced budget. That held our feet to the fire. So I can understand. But yes, the governors do have a right. Sometimes they'll overreach out. I was going to ask you all some things I need to, well, I've got this type of an audience. I've got to find out what you think about minimum wage. I've got to find out what you think about our war efforts and basically, is the president overreaching? Should we have congressional approval? Some of these things. And then also the Bowles-Simpson approach. It's an all-in approach to restructuring our tax. I mean, to me, without that, we're dead in the water. But these are the types of things that we're not getting any traction because all these other social issues have popped up, and the income inequality, all the different things, workplace rights. We're really deep into all that stuff, and it's not going anywhere.
Yes,
but yes,
yes,
they do have a right.
Oh. Yes, sir.
In the middle there.
Yeah. This one over here, then we'll come back to you.
This is a great conversation, and thank you for permitting us to engage in it. It's generally conceded that money is a fairly compelling metric in politics. With that said, can you folks speak to the January 2010 Supreme Court decision on Citizens United regarding how that's affected everything you've been talking about this morning?
As far as I'm concerned, it changed the whole game plan. And the reason it did, there's no transparency. I don't think we should ever limit your right to spend your money. I think through the political process, it should be totally transparent, and I should know who's doing it. And if I know who's doing it, I pretty much can figure out the purpose, and I can defend myself. When they come after you for the sake of the kids, I don't know who for the sake of the kids. That means I must not be for the sake of the kids. That means you are, and you're spending $10 million against me, just beating the living crap out of me, and I can't defend it and show what your ulterior motive is. That's what's killing us. And that's why you've got people basically in a non-action. So if the easiest vote for me to take as a senator is I can vote no. Every vote in Congress and vote no on everything.
Safest vote is no, right?
Safe vote. It's a happy retirement home.
Yeah.
It looks like that now sometimes, but it would really, truly be that way. But because you have to, can you imagine me coming from West Virginia voting for background checks, not only voting for it, but writing the bill? Can you only imagine when I went home? But I went into, well, but the bottom line was it was common sense. But I had to get my friends on the left, who basically wanted to ban everything. And so I sit down with Diane and Chuck and everybody, and I said, I saw you have a pretty nice car out there. And I looked on the speedometer. Your car says 160 on the speedometer. I looked at the speed limit signs, they're only 70. Why'd you buy that car? How come you have that? You don't need that car. I said, that's what you have to think about law-abiding gun owners. They have a right, and they have a right to do that. They should be able to do it anywhere within the great confines of this country, as long as they're law-abiding. Now, with that being said, if I'm a law-abiding citizen, don't you think that if I'm not going to sell my gun to a stranger or to someone who's mentally unstable or to a convict, and I go to a gun show or I go online when I don't have any type of relationship with that person, I'd want to know? That was a responsible position to take. To a T in West Virginia, every gun club that I know and I belong to and talk to all of them and go shooting and hunting with them, they finally said, Joe, it's not your bill. We like your bill. We just don't trust government stopping there. We think if we succumb to that, they'll take everything else. That's the lack of trust in government today.
Can I just respond just quickly? The decision was terrible. It equates, first of all, corporations are people, and it equates this money is speech. So what that means is more money is more speech, and gigantic money is gigantic speech. And
do you ever see it reversed?
well, let me tell you a couple things. So our report that's out there talks about the need for full and total disclosure. All the dark pools, all the money coming from all the groups. I'm from Wichita, Kansas. We have a very famous family that are located in Wichita, Kansas, that are involved in a lot of these things, and they're fine. Constitutionally, they should be permitted to do whatever they can, but they should disclose it fully. And none of this money should come in without being disclosed. In terms of changing it, the only change, I doubt Congress is going to be able to fundamentally address this problem. I think the interesting thing about the Eric Cantor race in Virginia is that he was outspent. I mean, Cantor outspent his opponent 38-1. And through grassroots politics and social media and everything else, he was able to compete. There were other factors there. So there are some new things. Modern technology and social networks allow people to have more democratic power base than they would have otherwise had before. But, you know, yeah, I'd like to see the constitutional amendment myself. I'd like to see increased role for small contributions, but I doubt Congress is probably going to get into this battle, so there will either be a new judge on the Supreme Court that will reverse the battle, or else the efforts will take place by you, the people, that will demand their public officials to disclose their money and perhaps use it more responsibly. And, you know, that's my view. So
I used to in my speeches talk about the fact that I'm a lawyer, I have to be careful about this, but you know, that I'm not totally sure whether members of the Supreme Court understand the Constitution. They might. But when they said that you know, corporations, you know, are like people, thought, you know, they should have taken a course in corporate law, which makes very clear the distinctions between corporations and people. But I probably am more extreme in this than you are. What I've advocated and what I advocate is I think we need to get rid of all contributions except from individual human beings. When you go to vote and you look at line, who gets to cast a vote? It's only people. And so what I advocated in my book, and it was extreme, I don't think there should be any corporate money, any labor union money, any PAC money, any political party money, nothing except individual contributions, limited and transparent. And, you know, actually when Dan and I were running for Congress, there was a limit. I could not take a penny from a corporation. I could not take a chair for my campaign office from a corporation. There was a limited amount. And I'm a little more optimistic maybe than Dan, because I'm not sure that it would be impossible to craft legislation defining person in terms of election law, you know, to get around
the only way that'll happen, though, is if there is a massive public groundswell for this. It will not happen without it, because the powers of the status quo will keep it from happening.
Let me tell you where we are today, how you can bring it back to the middle. This all started because labor unions had the upper hand as far as how they could put money into campaigns, and corporations could not. So there was always an unbalance there. So corporate America was pushing back all the time. How come we can't? It's an unfair advantage. They can do this, we can't. Okay, then comes Citizens United. Then it tilts, right? It tilts. Now, if somebody was a policymaker, could sit down with the unions and with corporate America and say, okay, here's the new rules. You've seen how it can be out of balance. You can see why we were upset from corporate America for 50 years. Now you can see how we're upset from labor of how much advantage you have that we don't have. So can we find the happy medium? We don't have any deal maker coming and bringing them together. And I guarantee you they both would like to. You think the corporations want to continue to keep writing these checks? I don't think so, but they think they have to now in order to keep it moving. And I think the labor unions believe that they don't have a chance to compete in a very competitive race because they don't have the wherewithals or the bullets to shoot. It's a perfect time to bring. When things get this far out, you can bring them back, but nobody wants to do that for some reason.
So the gentleman at this table right here was yeah.
Initially, my question was similar to his, but we have elected very, very talented people to Congress. Unfortunately, not many as talented as you gentlemen.
Glad you recognize
Shouldn't, and while it's important for you to meet with your constituents on various items to know what they think, would it be possible to have some legislation that will make you be in Washington or working 4 days a week so that your talents can be greater used for the balance of the country?
Can I just say, this report calls for 5-day-a-week work week. Every other American works 5 days a week, you know.
And we agree on that. There's a lot of us in Congress that says, listen, if the people back in West Virginia know that they expect me to be in Congress from Monday through Friday, 3 weeks out of the year, and they expect me to have 1 week to come home and work my constituents and work my state to make sure I'm in touch, that would be very acceptable to them, very acceptable. And if we had the Senate and the House calendars synced up, so we were all on the same calendars, you could expect to see all your representatives every 3rd week of the month. They'll be back in state. The other 3 weeks, don't expect to see them. You need to go to Washington if you want to see them, or talk to our reps on the road. It would work out perfectly, but it's not the rule.
Joe is the national head of No Labels, and I'm one of the co-founders of No Labels, and that's part of our platform as well. You know, full work week. So yeah, it would be. I don't think you need legislation. You just need pressure on the legislative leaders to make that happen. Yeah, all the way in the back, because otherwise people in the back just don't get a chance.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for explaining and helping us with the inner workings of Congress itself. I'm curious because it's a multifaceted problem, the gridlock. Could you comment on the primary system and how few people are voting, and how of those people that are voting, how much may be on the extreme, and if that's part of the problem? The other thing, I don't know the answer to this, but I'm curious as to how many people voted in Eric Cantor's campaign.
Let me take part of that question. I started asking myself, and this has nothing to do with the person. I'm not saying anything critical of the person, but Ted Cruz, played a major part in the decision to at least have a partial government shutdown. And I wondered, how did Ted Cruz get to be a United States Senator? And he had a primary, against the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, David Dewhurst, who was very popular. And Dewhurst trounced him in the primary, but didn't get over 50%. So they had a runoff, and there was a lot of money came in from the outside groups, that supported Cruz, and he won. But he got less than 700,000 votes in a state of 26 million people. And so I said, well, okay, then why doesn't David Dewhurst just run against him in the general election where all the Texans get to vote? And Ted Cruz certainly would not have won if all the voters in Texas had been able to participate. But Texas has a law, it's called a sore loser law, that if you didn't win your primary or convention, you're not allowed to be on the ballot in November. When our friend Mike Castle, I thought, was going to end up in the U.S. Senate with you. We lost to a lady named Christine O'Donnell in the primary. She only got 30,000 votes in the primary in a state of a million people. But then Mike Castle was not allowed to be on the ballot. So we need some fundamental changes in our election system. What happens is that regardless of the turnout, and there was pretty good turnout, I think, in Eric Cantor's primary, but regardless of the turnout, we let small groups of the ideologues and hyperpartisans determine who can be on the ballot in November, and that's not some crazy scheme, that's the law in 46 states. And so we need some fundamental changes in our election laws so that the people themselves are deciding who will get to be their senators and members of the House.
And it's an excellent question. So, frankly, the problem is actually more serious in the House, where congressional districts are so homogeneous that there are only Republicans or only Democrats. So we need a national change in how we conduct congressional redistricting. So it's done by an independent process. Right now, it's the legislators that choose their voters rather than voters who choose their legislators. So all these districts are extraordinarily narrow. And by the way, the voting turnout in primaries is somewhere between 15 and 18% nationally. And so imagine 15% of the voters are determining who your next congressman is. And so that creates an opportunity. Then if you have homogeneous districts, whether it's Democrat or Republican, you're always going to cater to your base, always, not to the middle. So this is a very serious problem. And one of the other things our report calls for is one national primary day for Congress. One day, because nobody even knows when their primary elections are. I mean, it's a big secret in most cases, even though the ads are on there. I'm not sure that will ever pass, but it's to try to elevate people into the primaries who are less homogeneous than they currently are.
I agree. That we have, by law, the first Tuesday of every November, every 2 years, is the national election. We should have a primary set a date too, and then also the districts should be done by computer models that have basically more of a diversity to them. Iowa does a computer model, works very well. We know it will work, but politicians don't like it because they can't carve out who they want to vote for them. Right there. Right, we have it, and then there's a gentleman clear in the back there too, but there's, I think, whoever gets a mic first gets a talk.
One of the other things that seriously bothers me is how long elections go. I mean, no sooner is somebody elected than you start running again. Whereas in most other democracies, especially in parliamentary systems, and even in countries that have relatively large populations, the electioneering time is limited. Is there ever going to be any possibility ever in anybody's lifetime that we limit the amount of time we spend campaigning in this country?
I think it's been so lucrative for the media, I don't think the media will let you do it. Forget about that. We'd love to have it. Give us a short period, we'd love it. But I don't think the media would stand for it.
There's another factor in that too, and that is when you have a parliamentary system, you're not choosing, the idea of a legislator having a responsibility to represent their constituencies is not part of a parliamentary system. You can represent a district that you've never visited. And so when you're in a parliamentary system, you can have a short election period because you're just voting for a party. You're voting for a party philosophy. So there is some merit to having a somewhat longer election season, but I agree that the television stations in particular make a fortune off of having a campaign that lasts forever.
And I'm not sure that with modern media, telecommunications, social media, all the grassroots efforts that are happening in this country now, that the advocacy groups would ever want to just limit elections, because I think they would view that the powers of the status quo would be able to control the process if it were limited. It's a very good question you asked. I just doubt that that's ever going to happen in America by law. If you could restrict the amount of money in the process, it would give less money to buy ads, to do that kind of stuff.
You got a gentleman right back there who's been...
Thank you. Isn't it possible that we can reframe what's going on, that instead of gridlock, there is an enormous opportunity now that there wasn't years ago when we were younger, to actually choose a very distinct future for America. When we were all younger, there were liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats, and people are saying, oh, it's so terrible that they're now polar, but that's actually a fantastic choice for people to make in terms of what their values are. And I think that the major issue is we're talking a lot about getting people engaged and everything and how low the turnout is in primaries. In the last midterms in 2010, there were 127 million people who were eligible to vote who didn't vote. So the question is, how do you engage more people into the process, and then maybe with that extra 59% of the electorate actually voting, we can decide what the real majority would be. So for example, if there was another 24 people in the House of Representatives that were Democratic, I'm sorry, 24 that were a certain number in the Senate, a certain number of House, that created a majority, then you would have the entire Congress going in one direction and there wouldn't be gridlock. And again, if 59% more of the public were engaged, perhaps that could happen. Like your thoughts on how to engage the public.
Let me say, before you answer that, Joe, at 5 o'clock today, Joe and I are going to be having a conversation. I can't remember what room it's in, but it's in your agenda, and get much more into policy questions and the policies that divide and unite.
We're going to talk about energy. We're going to talk about tax policies. We're going to talk about the things that divide us and how we come together.
It's right in this room? Perfect. Great.
Thank you.
Real quick on that, what you just said about that. I've had people, I had some high school kids in West Virginia said, we think we can tell you how to get everybody to vote. And I said, how would that be? And they said, anybody that gets a check of any sort from the federal government has to show a voter card where you voted in order to get that. Whether it's Medicaid, whether it's to get your federal tax returns, and I'm thinking, here's a 10th grade young lady that probably makes more sense of trying to get people to the polling place, at least gets a dialogue started. But she said, just think about that. I know people are getting checks here and there and everything else. If they all had to say, okay, show me a voter card where you voted, then you can get your...
I think your question's a good question. You ever remember Jay Leno had jaywalking? And he'd ask those questions, who's the President of the United States? And they'd say Groucho Marx. And you'd wondered whether the people really didn't know it all or whether it was part of an entertainment game. This issue is much more comprehensive than just congressional rules. This is a cultural problem in America, the disengagement from our political system. We had it during the Second World War, the greatest generation. People came back, they had served their country, and they became contributors to American society, and politics was important to them. And somehow we have to re-engage that. That's why national service, public service, engaging young people early on to recognize that an obligation to contribute to your community is part of citizenship. And what we find is most people who do that kind of thing become productive members of society and vote. And they have to see that it's in their interest to do that kind of thing. The other thing is civic education, how we have demeaned the value of teaching people civics in our high schools around the country. So it's rules, it's primary changes, it's redistricting, but it's also how we get the American people to believe that they're part of something bigger than themselves.
How many of you all believe that we should have 2 years public service for every high school graduate? Of any type, whether it's a service, whether it's social work, whatever. Okay, and they think, because that it takes ownership of your country, and we have very few people that believe they have ownership. How many believe in raising the minimum wage? Now, how many believe it should be a state's right? How many believe it needs to take the federal? It's about. Okay. How many believe in going back into Baghdad, Iraq? We're already there. How many believe we should? How many believe we should get out and just let them go ahead and tear each other apart? Because they're going to do it anyway. These are the things. It's just, it goes on and on and on. And we're going to get into that next week. It's going to be very, very contentious next week, I can tell you, because he's asking for approval of $500 million. And I just got to throw this out at you. It doesn't make sense to me at all. We have Assad. We were sitting in a secured briefing the other day, and one of the senators looked at me and says, "Where's good old Saddam Hussein when you need him?" Now, think about that. And here we are, now we're talking about we're going to arm what we call the friendly rebels, if we can identify who they are, to take out Assad. And Assad is fighting ISIS as strong, if not stronger, than anybody we have now with all the... I'm thinking, I got to hear this security briefing to make this sense out of this one. It don't make sense, but that's what we're dealing with. That's the kind of craziness we deal with.
We're also dealing with lack of information. So we've sent these advisors back in, but also without nearly as much notice, about 1,000 armed contractors.
I asked the question. I says, what's 300 advisors going to do that 100,000 of our troops couldn't do for 10 years? Now we're going to send 300 in, and we know exactly how to turn this thing around.
But they're good. They're good guys. So, well, we're out of time. But as again, Senator Manchin's going to be back here, and I'm going to be interviewing him.
I'm going to be moving around if you all want it.
Yeah, and at 5 o'clock. So, here's the boss. Morgan, do we have time for one more?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Right there.
Go for it.
Wait 1 second to get the mic there.
Thank you. With regards to what you were just talking about, we're in Iraq. We heard the ambassador from Israel yesterday say we're in. We have to understand that we're not going to get out. I'm really curious what the senators and congressmen know. The president has filed for powers of war about 2 weeks ago. He's also claimed that he doesn't need powers of war. And my senators, Mark Udall and Bennett, I've called them to try to find out where they're standing on this and what information they're going. I think that's a great example of where the citizens are detached from the information on something as serious as this, and what the senators should be speaking out on, and what the president is saying, and how it's a disconnect to what he's doing.
We believe the president has all the powers he needs in order to protect our embassies. We're all in agreement on that. Do whatever it takes to protect our embassies. We can't be run out of country, and we can't just have every roughshod. We just can't have that happen. Now, how far he takes that? Does he want to use drones, airstrikes, all of our military power, and say that he's protecting just the compound, okay? I don't think so. I've been very clear about this. I think he needs to come back. It needs to have the approval of Congress, the seal of Congress, because we speak for the people. And he has to be in touch with that. He cannot expand on that. And I've been very clear, as all of other senators, Democrats and Republicans. They can't make this political anymore. We spent close to $2 trillion, a little over $2 trillion. We're still in Afghanistan. In Baghdad, what you all really don't know is how many private contractors we still have in country. The private contractors is unbelievable. So with that being said, we're going to get people out. We have to. There are some strategic spaces we need. We think we can hit from afar. We have the intel, and if they'll just basically do what we can do with our technology, with all of our smart weapons, if you will, we don't have to be occupying these countries. We really don't. And I feel very strongly about that, because you're not going to change them. I told them, I said, the Hatfields and McCoys killed each other for 100 years over a pig. Over a pig. And here they've been fighting for thousands, or hundreds, well, thousands, since 600. They've been fighting for centuries. And we're not going to change that sectarian divide. It's going to be divided up. I believe Joe Biden was right on 10 years or more ago when he said it'll be divided up into sectarian lines.
Yeah, there's one all the way back here. So we've got a couple of minutes.
I'd like to get us back onto the central issue of the topic. And I want to underscore what has been said about redistricting and the centrality of culture. Robert Putnam has written convincingly about bowling alone, the loss of a cross-cutting civic society. Virtually all social science research shows in many parts of the world the central importance of cross-cutting civil society organizations that draw people together to talk about issues that are relevant to them, and that this is fundamental to democracy. I hear a number of specific solutions that you're advancing that seem to me to be within the crystal confines of simply the politics of government. Redistricting seems to be the one that reaches out into the larger culture. We are confronted with forces of consumerism that sell a public idea that things are what make us happy rather than people. We have moved increasingly to CIDs and segregated living environments where we don't interact with people who think differently than us. This is what the current research is showing. So what I want to say is, beyond redistricting, what other kinds of political solutions can you see that reach out to lead some culture change instead of just being responsive to this huge tidal wave of isolationism, hyper-individualism, and polarization of attitudes that the world is simply good or bad rather than nuanced and requires...
Part of this is at a local level. Joe was a governor. Part of it is our public education system. And Dan mentioned this. We in our universities, he mentioned the public schools, high schools and all, but in our universities, we've essentially turned them into vo-tech schools, meaning they're really good at teaching people how to do the skills they need to make a living, be part of the economic machine, compete with China, but not how to be citizens. We don't teach civics, we don't teach critical thinking, we don't fund the humanities, we don't teach philosophy and art and poetry and music and the things that make you an intelligent, thoughtful, introspective human being. That is what's required for the kind of a democratic government that we have. So it's not just at the political level. There are some fundamental changes we need to make in the way we approach a lot of things, including our education system, if we're going to make that work. So if you change the redistricting and bring more people into the mix, and they still don't know how to think critically or how the government is supposed to work, it's not going to change anything.
I'd say I agree totally with you. I agree totally with Mickey. It sounds like I agree with everybody. But
are you a politician, Dan?
But the culture of service. There's when you walk over to the other side of the campus, there's one line that says, "Service is the rent we pay for citizenship." And it's such a great quote, you know? And so that culture of service, and that's, the guy who's leading this effort at Aspen is John Bridgeland, who is President Bush's faith-based initiative. But that's a larger cultural issue in the country. The more serious issue is what you can do, I think, with redistricting in the short term, because I really do think that is very important.
Yeah, if we don't stop now, you won't get to whatever you're going to for 9 o'clock.
Joe wants to find
so we're out of time.
Let me just say, very quickly that basically when I first got to the Senate, I was so disenchanted with what I saw, and I thought, well, I'm going to the big leagues, it's going to be much better. It really did not, because it had been so ingrained. So I joined a group called No Labels, and Don, and there's a group of people, and how many of you know about No Labels? How many of you are involved in No Labels? Let me just tell you what. It was a group that I found that basically truly embodied the spirit of public service. And what we're trying to do, and I got totally involved, myself and John Huntsman are the co-chairman, national co-chairmans of No Labels. We want to be branded. So if a person says, I'm a member of No Labels, problem solvers, you can automatically, you don't care whether they're Democrat or Republican, but that's a person that will vote for their country before themselves or their party. And you got to get back to public service, and it has to be about our country first. And that's what we're trying to do. So we're moving the ball forward on this thing, and as many of you can get involved. But I said this, and I'll leave you with this. In West Virginia, I've said a person in West Virginia, they're so in tune with a human, because it's all human action. We have to depend on each other to survive there. They'll shake your hand, look in your eyes, and see your soul. They can tell in a heartbeat if you're there for the right reason, to help them or to help yourself. And that's the beautiful thing about our process. It still takes pressing the flesh, and whenever we're able to just do it by ads on television, it takes the personal contact away, we're in trouble. Thank you all. Appreciate having me.